Hello guys and welcome back. So in the last section we talked about input properties and how we can assign some value to a particular component which can be used inside it. Okay. Now in this section we'll talk about view queries and why exactly do we need them. Okay. So let's say for example I have this message list component. Okay, and inside the message list component I have the app message component as a child element. Okay, now if I wanted to have access to the message component inside my TypeScript class, okay, so how exactly can I do that? Now Angular provides a lot of ways to do that. Okay, and the best way to do that is to use the view queries. Okay, now right now we have the message component inside the template of the message list. Okay, there might be also a case wherein we have projected some content. Okay, and by content projection, let me just tell you what I mean by that. Okay, so suppose I have a message list component inside my app component. Okay, and now let's say that we want this message list component to be customizable. Okay, so whoever uses this component is able to somehow customize the view of this component. Okay, so to provide that functionality to the user of this component, we can place a ng content tag inside the template of this component. Okay, let's place that. Okay, and let's go back to the application. No changes so far. Okay, but now what this content can do is it can hold the value, or it can hold the template or markup that is sent out whenever we add some content in here. Okay, so say for example if I wanted to add an h3 tag which says something like let's say this is the projected content. Okay, so if I save this now, I'll see the h3 tag in here. Okay, but if I don't have the ng content tag, if I comment this out and save this, I won't be able to see the content, the projected content anymore. Okay, so that's how you can use content projection in your um, components templates to make them configurable and make their templates or their um, views configurable. Okay, let's undo this change. Now let's say that in the app components HTML, okay, in this message list component, I'm projecting a app message component. Okay, so I'll have to also provide it some value here because I want to see a message printed out. Okay, so let's say I provided do we have any? Yeah, okay, so we have a title property inside the app component that I can pass to the message component in here. Okay, now the value of this title property is app. So in the app component, if I add this and if I save this now and let the app reload, I'll see the 4 messages, but then I'll also see another message uh, that was projected from the content. Okay, all right. So now let's say inside the message list component, I wanted to have access to the first app message and I wanted to somehow change that message. Okay, to do that, I can create a property inside the message list component. Okay, and I'll decorate that property with a decorator named ViewChild. Okay, now ViewChild is a decorator that I can import from Angular core. So I'll do that. Okay, and now this can be used as a method to which I will pass the type of decorator that I want to have access to. Okay, so in here I can do something like message component. Okay, it will specify that I want the message component from the message list components template and I want to have access to it. Okay, so I'll name this, say, first message component. Okay, and this would be of type message component. Okay, now I'm naming this as the first message component because in the message list template we'll have a lot of app message components, right? Since we are having say 4 messages inside this, we'll have 4 message components inside the template. Okay, since we are using the view child, we'll be having access to the first, or Angular will return the first message component that it sees onto the template. Okay, now let's say I wanted to change the message that this particular component had. Okay, now to do that, we need to first have a look at one more thing. Okay, now suppose if I change the property in the constructor itself. So if I do something like this dot message dot message first message component dot message, now this thing right here is the exact thing that we see right here. Okay, so the message component is having these two properties, message and ng on in it, that I can have access to in here. Okay, so if I go back and see the intelligence that I get, I'm getting suggestions for messages and ng on in it. Okay, so if say I'm change the message from this to changed the message from message list constructor. Okay, so if I save this now, I'm going to get an error. It will say that it cannot set the property message of undefined. Okay, and that is because we are trying to have access to the component even before the constructor is initialized, or even before it is created. Okay, so this is going to give us an error. Now there is a life cycle hook that Angular provides us. So every component in Angular has certain life cycles, and it has certain life cycle hooks that are called whenever that particular life cycle is reached. Okay, so we want to have access to this component, and we can have access to this component only after the view of this component has been initialized. Okay, so there is a lifecycle hook called after view init. Okay, now to have access to that, we'll have to implement an interface named after view init that we can import from Angular core. Okay, and now to implement this interface properly, we should be having a method defined named ng after view init. Okay, and in this, now if we try to have access to the first message component dot message, we'll be having access to it, and in here we can now safely change the value of the message property for that first message component. So I'll change the property to say this was changed from message list component components ng after view init method. Okay, let's save this now and let the app reload, and now we can see that let's get rid of this error though. Okay, now it will say that the first message was now changed from message 1 to this. Okay, so this is how you can have access to a particular component via the ViewChild decorator, or via the ViewChild query that Angular, the ViewChild view query that Angular provides us. Okay, now suppose I wanted to have access to uh, all the child components in the view, okay, of that particular component. To do that, what I can do is I can use, instead of the view child, I can use view children. Okay, and I'll change the name to all message components. Okay, and now this would be of type query list. Okay, this is a type, and then this is a generic type, so we can create a query list of type message component. Okay, now query list and view children are something that I'll have to import from Angular core, so I'll do that. Okay, and then I'll also import query list. Okay, all right, now let me just comment this out, and now I can have access to all the message components inside the ng after view init. Okay, so now let's say there is a method on this view children query list named toArray that I can use to convert this query list into an array, and now I can call a for each method on this and pass it a callback function. Now it will return to me one message at a time, and now with this message object I can change the value of let me just get rid of this. Okay, so now with this message I can change the value of each and every message property. Okay, and I'll set the same value for all of them. Let's save this, and now all the value for all these messages should be changed. Okay, so this is how you can have access to the child components that are already present inside the template of a particular parent component. Okay, now let's say we have some projected content as well, right? We have this message component that was projected as a part of the app component in here, right? So now let's say that I wanted to change the message of this as well. Okay, and let's say we have multiple of these now. Let's save this and see how it affects the template. Okay, so we now have four message components as projected projected components. Okay, or as projected content. So now if suppose I wanted to have access to this, I won't be having access to this from the view child, as you can see, and or view children, as you can see. If I had access to these projected contents using view children, then all of these messages should have changed to this particular one out here. Okay, but that didn't, which means that there must be a separate way to do that. Okay, so I don't really have access to these projected components as of now, but I can have access to them using not the view child or the view children query, but the content child query. Okay, so let's say we will use the content child query in the same way that we use um, view child query with. Okay, so instead of view child, I'll specify content child. Okay, and now I'll also rename this to first message first. projected, I'll specify this as first projected message component. Okay, now after view init, we can have access to all the view children, but we won't be having access to the content children inside this. Okay, uh, let's just see that in action quickly. So I'll say this dot first projected message dot message equal to, let's say, this projected message was also changed. Okay, let's save this and see. Okay, so I'm already getting an error here, right? So this won't work in here. Okay, also I'll have to use content children from, not from here. I'll just import it from Angular core like so and save this. Okay, so the first one was changed though, but ideally this is not the appropriate place to change it. Okay, because in some cases there might be a case wherein you might not have access to that particular component. Okay, so it's always safe to have access to the content children inside a lifecycle hook that would be called ng after content init. Okay, so it's not the case that we might never get access to content children inside the ng after view init handler, but there might be some cases wherein you might not have access to them inside this particular lifecycle hook. So it's always recommended to use the ng after content init lifecycle hook if you are having, or if you are changing anything that is related to the content children. Okay, so I'll place that here. Okay, now also it is recommended that just like we did for an after view init, that we implemented the after view init lifecycle hook, we should also implement after content init lifecycle hook, that is again imported from Angular core. Okay, right here. All right, now this was one way in which you can have access to the content children, but since we are using the content child decorator, this will only give us access to the first content child, although there are 4 of them here. Okay, but again, if I wanted to have access to multiple content children, instead of the content child decorator, we could use the content children decorator. Okay, so I can do something like content children. This would contain a message component, all projected message components. Okay, and then I'll also have to import the content children decorator from Angular core. Now, just like we did here, I can now change the content of all of them. I can now also have access to all these content children with this property here. This was changed after content init method. Okay, save this, reload, and now the first 4 were changed and the last 4 were also changed. Okay, the last 4 were projected content and the first 4 were view content. Okay, so that is how you can have access to view components and content, the components that are present in the view, as well as the contents that are projected as content. Okay, so that was it. Let's just quickly go through these view queries again. So Angular provides these 4 decorators: ViewChild, ViewChildren, ContentChild, and ContentChildren to get references for elements. ViewChild can be used to capture elements from components template that we did right here. Okay, so we can only have access to these app message components since they are present in the view, and we were not able to have access to the content children that were um, projected from the app component here. Okay, so that can be done with content children though. So ViewChild or ViewChildren can be used to capture elements from the components template, while ContentChild and content children can be used to capture elements that are projected inside those components. Okay, and then there is one more thing that can be done. Okay, so let's just quickly see that as well. So in Angular, what you can do is you can say uh, create template variables. Okay, so let's say I create a template variable for this particular thing. Okay, I'll call this say um, temp message. Sorry. Okay, now this temp message that we have right here would be a part of the content children. Okay, so what I can do is let's just rename this to temp message component, and in here, instead of specifying the type of component that I want to extract from the template, I'll specify the ID or the name of the template variable that we assign to it. Okay, so the name was temp message. I'll paste that here, and this one was the first template, the first content child that was projected. So if I say comment this out, and instead of this I use this right here and save it, go back to my application, it will now say that the projected message was now changed. Okay, so in this way you can also create template variables, and then you can have access to them inside your parent components TypeScript class using ViewChild and ContentChild. Okay, also you can have access to any particular HTML template as well. You'll just have to create a template variable just like so. Okay, and then you can have access to it. And then there is also something called native element that you might have to access in that case. Okay, so I guess that was all. The video is already getting too long, so that was all regarding the view queries that we had in Angular. In the next section, we'll talk about component interactions and how can multiple components, say a parent component and a child component, or vice versa, or sibling components can interact with each other. Okay, so I'll see you in the next video. Thanks a lot.